And welcome to Rock, Paper, Swords, the historical action and adventure podcast. My name is Matthew Harvey.
And my name is Stephen A. Mackay.
We're both best-selling historical fiction authors, and together we chat about all things historical and anything that could fall under the banner of action and adventure in books, film, TV, and today, games.
Oh, and we also talk about rock music from time to time.
So our guest today is Jason Kingsley, an incredibly successful businessman and a technologist who is also obsessed with the past. He is CEO of Rebellion Developments, game developers responsible for such games as Alien vs. Predator and the hugely popular Sniper Elite games. Rebellion Publishing purchased 2000 AD in, I believe, 2000 AD, and publishes comics featuring some amazing characters such as Judge Dredd, Strontium Dog, and Slaine. In 2017, Jason started a medieval history YouTube channel called Modern History TV, along with his brother Chris Kingsley and senior producer Brian Jenkins, under the banner of Rebellion Productions. The YouTube channel has over 750,000 subscribers and provides a wealth of information. He also hosts the podcast Future Imperfect. And in 2012, he was made an officer of the Order of the British Empire for service to the economy. So it is our great pleasure to welcome to Rock, Paper, Swords, Jason Kingsley, OBE.
That's a very grand introduction. Thank you very much.
Yes.
I should just stop talking now because everything is going to be downhill from this point on. Everybody's expecting something marvellous.
Chief Judge Kingsley, I told him to introduce you as, but he refused.
Well, when we used to have business cards, I always thought that the sort of titles were very boring, managing director or CEO, and I always felt that everybody should be a bit more creative and sort of have a grand high magister or great panjandrum or giant elephant of the cosmos as their title. But of course, it wouldn't communicate anything to people. And interestingly, I've actually don't have business cards anymore, but my business cards do still have a fax number on them at all. But I don't think I've used a fax in 2 decades. So
Yeah, we got an email from someone. Stephen, you sent me you got an email or message from someone recently, and he was saying, "What's this? I've been sent this," and it was like one of these weird sort of spammy type emails asking for you to do something, and in it had the fax number. And I said, "Come on, seriously, these people? Who are these people? These scammers now with fax numbers?"
Yeah, so like retro sort of weird sci-fi fax machine, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
I honestly can't remember the last time that I used or saw a fax machine, but maybe somewhere in the world they're still using them. Who knows? So first question we got for you is about your upcoming book that we just discovered about just a couple of days ago when we were researching this.
Yeah, I saw your tweet last night.
Book coming out called Leading the Rebellion. And yeah, tell us a bit about that.
It was sort of an idea at work. I mean, one of the things that I did quite a lot of stuff. So with Tiger, I'm chair of Tiger, which is a trade body for the games industry. And one of the things that we're always looking at is best practice in business. And the idea is, if you are ethical in business, you will be more successful than if you are unethical. And I think that really generally applies to most things in life, with a few notable exceptions. Some people can be successful if they're unethical, but usually they have a comeuppance, and that's fairly timely. There's a few comeuppances happening right now for people on the world stage. And I just thought it'd be really interesting to talk about a book on ethics. And then it suddenly dawned on me that my other hobby, which is I train war horses, I have my own armor, and I can use swords and lances. I do joust and all these kind of things. So I time travel by reenacting the skills of a medieval knight, but very practically, I do them absolutely properly as best I can. I live on a farm and I look after horses myself. So one of the things was, actually, you know what? The rules of chivalry are about ethics. They're a set of rules that control powerful people's behavior, mostly men back in those days. And there was no police force back then. If you were a powerful lord, you had soldiers. They had weapons, and you could go around doing whatever you wanted. And what was to stop you doing really bad things? And the answer was society in general, and the rules, or rather guidelines around what is the rules of chivalry. And I just thought that would be really interesting. The trouble is, chivalry is one of those things that the more you study it, the more nebulous it gets, and you realize there never were any rules. There were sort of ideas and ideals and sort of principles, and it varied from place to place. So, for example, which I found very funny, humility was considered a knightly virtue in England and in lots of places like France. In what's now Germany, humility is not mentioned at all. So German knights were entirely allowed within their own chivalric code to be boastful and show offy, whereas other knights were not supposed to be. So, even back then in the medieval period, it was the rules were not widely followed by everybody, but I think a lot of people tried to live by an ethical code. And of course, you had the Teutonic Knights and the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller and stuff, who had very strong monastic codes, and that's a different thing, but it sort of overlays too. So the idea was to write a book about my personal experience in business and how my concept of chivalric ethics sort of overlay what you do in business, so like honesty. How does the rule of honesty apply to modern business? Well, I think you should, where you can, be honest and straightforward in your business dealings. And I've always believed that in business, if you do a fair deal and you honor that deal, the other side does it, there's a fair chance they'll reciprocate. They'll do a good deal back for you, or in the future you might get benefits. Somebody puts a good word in for you quietly with somebody they've asked, and then you get another good gig. And there's sort of hidden benefits to behaving ethically in business, in my opinion. So that was what it was all about. And then it was an idea, and then I thought, yeah, you know what, that could be interesting and useful for people. So yes, it's out in middle of July the 18th. Called Leading the Rebellion, how to questing for success in business and life. So it's my first book. Well, actually, that's not true. The first book I've written as a proper grown-up. I did write a best-selling book when I was a teenager called Steel Eye and the Lost Magic, which is a Ladybird game book.
Really?
Okay.
Probably none of your people will have realized, but yeah, I wrote several game books actually in the same period of time as the Warlock of Firetop Mountain and Sir Ian Livingstone's fantastic work.
Yeah, I was when I saw the Leading the Rebellion thing, it made the name of your book and the fact that your book was about your sort of career in business. It made me think of Sir Ian Livingstone's Dice Men book that
Yes.
about the foundations of Games Workshop and everything, which I read recently, and it was really great. And obviously, I was a huge fan of the Warlock of Firetop Mountain books and all of that.
Yeah, well, Ian's a good friend of mine as well, so it's quite funny. So I saw him after he got his knighthood, and I said, "Oh, congratulations, that's wonderful," And he said, "Yeah, but technically speaking, you do more knightly things than I do." And I said, "Well, no, it's not like that anymore, is it? But but if you ever wanted to have a joust, then feel free. I could organise it."
Brilliant.
Just talking about jousting, you do this on your Modern History TV channel. It's called on YouTube. You do jousting. You talk about armour and can you poop in armour. I watched last night. That was most entertaining, and other more mundane things like how to make medieval rushlights, which was really, really useful for like an author, and collecting urine and just all sorts of stuff from the medieval period. So you obviously love it, but do you think someone like us, if we were suddenly thrown back to medieval era, would be able to kind of deal with it? I mean, I played my drums last night, 3 songs, and I've got blisters, really so painful on my thumbs. I mean, we're soft nowadays. How would we deal with medieval?
But you know what? I think most of us would survive. I think you'd have a really hard time transitioning to the physical work involved. Just depends on your social status as well. But basically, if you want a drink of water, we go to the tap and we fill a tap and we swig the water and we don't think anything of it. Back then, somebody had to carry that water from a good water source, or they had to prepare the water, or it came from a good well. Yeah, people did drink water then, but they were also aware of dirty water, and they didn't have the germ theory of disease, but basically they weren't stupid. They knew if you went and drank from that muddy puddle, the chances are you get the shit and be in a difficult place. So, they're bright and practical. I think the horizons were different as well. We know about the world. We know there's a world out there. You can communicate, different societies, different languages. back then, the concept of a stranger or a foreigner, the word foreigner doesn't mean somebody from a different country. It means somebody from over the horizon, more or less. And then wherever you live, think of the nearest big town. Back in the medieval period, you'd probably have called them foreigners, and everybody else beyond was obviously a foreigner, but they would be foreigners too, because you'd probably, outside of things like pilgrimages and being drafted into war, you'd probably spend the majority of your life within sort of a day's walk or a day's ride of where you were born. Not everybody. People did go to the towns and cities, and there were big boat trips, and there were, obviously the Crusades, but there were trading missions and all sorts. So not everybody did that, but lots of people were effectively smallholders. And so if you do if you have an allotment, or if you like gardening, you're kind of a quarter of the way to living the medieval lifestyle anyway, to be honest.
I always think that. Oh, go ahead,
sorry,
Stephen.
but I had a shield made up for me. It was like on the cover of one of my books, and somebody made it up. So I bought it from him just as a nice ornament. Mm-hmm. As it turned out, I could barely lift the thing. It was so heavy. And I don't know how anybody could have fought. How strong were these guys in these Dark Ages?
I think they were wiry. I think they were more wiry than built. I think the chances of having anybody physically built like the kind of muscle type,
like the Rock type,
might have in the modern day, very, very small. You'd still have stronger people and weaker people, but I think they would have all been built like racing snakes. I think they would have been wiry, and have that sort of attitude toughness. If in your life, I mean, there are tragedies. The average 1 in 2 children died in childhood, and that kind of tragedy must have really affected people's psychology. I mean, it's a tragedy today, but it's relatively rare. And back then, it was completely common for a man and a woman to have several children who didn't make it, and that would affect society. Society was like that. That was probably not spoken about very much. People probably had post-traumatic stress. I was talking about the troubles that happen when people go to war and come back and have to reintegrate into society. PTSD, shell shock, as it used to be called, all these things. We kind of have an understanding now, but for thousands of years, they didn't. Mm-hmm. For thousands of years, if you survived, let's say you survived Agincourt, you walk back, you take a boat, you go across the thing, you walk back to your farm or where you were mustered from, and people go, what happened? It's like, I was just in the most shit experience of my life, and I really don't want to talk to anybody. But there wasn't really a support structure apart from your friends, and the tragedy must have been that many men, probably the majority of them, were horribly badly affected by it. But at the same time, lots of them were explorers as well. So without sort of bringing the whole thing too down, you had people who volunteered to walk to Jerusalem.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing about how different people deal with different things as well. And obviously that's the same now as it was in the past. Two people would be in the same battle or the same horrific situation and deal with it completely differently for whatever reason. And in my own books, I've got books set in the 7th century, and the first book is the main character. I basically looked at these two characters, like the protagonist, the antagonist, and I've got them in theory both suffering from post-traumatic stress, but one of them deals with it very differently than the other. So the antagonist has become a complete psycho basically, and loses his shit all the time and goes around killing people, whereas the protagonist obviously ends up being the hero of the thing. But both of them really suffering from just horrible stresses and suffering and things that have happened to them, and so they're not aware of it. But
one of the things I've done on the YouTube channel is obviously I've used sharp swords and sharp weapons to cut into targets, and nothing like real combat, obviously, but at the same time, it gives you a slight sort of window into that. And I remember I had a ballistic skull that's used for testing guns, and I hit it with what's called a horseman's pick, which is basically like a very small pickaxe that you use one-handed from horseback. And I remember the first we had several of these forensic heads to bash. And I'd never hit anything like that. I didn't know how hard you have to hit a human skull or a pretend human skull with this weapon to make it have an effect. And I thought you might have to hit quite hard. And the horrible truth is you really don't. You just have to ride past and you go pock on the top of somebody's head. The whole 6 inches of steel pyramid goes deep into their brains, through their skull, like pushing your thumb into a chocolate Easter egg. It's just that horrible resistance, and then pop, it just goes through. And the people said, you've gone a bit white. Are you all right? And I said, yeah, because that's just so shockingly easy but difficult. You know, the weapon is designed to do that. Why did I not assume it would do it efficiently? And it was horrendously efficient. And weirdly, Battle of Towton, we've got some of the dug graves from the victims, and some of them have got these square holes, big square holes in them. And there's a possibility that was exactly what happened to them. They were running away. Their side had broken. They were running away as best they could. Some bugger on a horse rides up behind them, tock on the top of their head, and they're dead. They fall to the ground dead, to be dragged into a pit and dug up by archaeologists a few hundred years later and put on display in a museum. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I guess if you're dead, you don't care.
Claim to fame,
That's a
anyway.
whole. That's an interesting ethical question right there, isn't it, or moral question or whatever.
Yeah. But it was remarkably easy, and the medieval weapons were very close up mostly. I mean, obviously you did have artillery like trebuchets and longbows and stuff, but they're sort of within viewing distance. Whereas today, most of the deaths, for example, the stuff that's happening in Ukraine at the moment and other places in the world, but in Ukraine, is artillery. You know, people are being blown up from a distance. That's causing most of the deaths. And there's no connection really between shooting this and it landing somewhere, because it's almost over the horizon in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So there's disassociation with the actual death, whereas the medieval world, as you know from your research, is close up.
I mean, there's a huge shift when you move from medieval into later history, where in the medieval period, of course, the leaders, the kings and whoever, they're actually there fighting. It'd be very different if Vladimir Putin had to go and actually fight, you know, at the front lines. He might have changed. He might change his mind. You know,
he might go. Most people maybe wouldn't want to, but I think Vladimir Putin might.
Well, he might he'd get killed, wouldn't he?
He's a bit, I suppose.
Yeah, he's a bit of a scrapper, or he was, wasn't he, when he was younger? He's quite a good judo fighter, apparently.
KGB.
All of that. Yeah.
So I don't know how much good that does you against an anti-tank missile or something.
No, well, how about this as a thought experiment? If you were the king and you went into battle and you knew you were going to fight, you'd have the most expensive kit, wouldn't you? And they all did. They all had their fancy kit, their best armor money could buy. If our political leaders had to go onto the front line, how much do you think they'd spend on their kit? How much would we be spending of our tax money on their kit? They would have the most amazing tanks, wouldn't they?
Yeah, as it is, we just spend loads of money on them doing things that are not protecting them from fighting. They're just lining their pockets for anyway. We could talk about politics, but maybe we shouldn't. That's probably enough politics.
We've only done my first question so far, and I'm sorry I've rambled too long already.
No, that's all we've done. We're sliding through. We got a couple. Yep. So we talked already quite a lot about history. So where does your love of history stem from? Where do you remember when you first sort of became obsessed with history?
Yeah, basically ever since I've been aware of thinking about things. I've loved horses, I've loved knights in armor, and fairy tales and legends and the tales of King Arthur, and the tales of daring do, going off on adventures and exploring and righting wrongs. So back in the days of role-playing games, Tunnels and Trolls, Dungeons and Dragons, which are all very in the media at the moment, but I was there at the beginning. I'm becoming a what do they call it? Not an old fogey, but I was there at the beginning.
Elder statesman.
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
Years ago, I was there. Gandalf, says Elrond.
Yeah.
I read Lord of the Rings for the first time when I was 9 years old, which was a mammoth book to read as a 9-year-old, and I'm pretty sure I skimmed bits of it. And I've been a huge fan of fantasy and genre, as you can tell from my business. Rebellion, we make action adventure games in sci-fi, history, fantasy spaces. So if you actually examine my life, I've managed to stay with all the things that I think are really fun, and make a living out of it as well, and make a living for other people too, because we've got over 500 members of staff now, which is huge.
That's amazing. Well, I was saying to my wife, and we were doing a bit of research yesterday, and I said to my wife, I said, this guy, Jason Kingsley, I said, he's just basically, I mean, I already knew about you, but obviously I was reading a bit more detail about your businesses and stuff. I said, basically, he's just managed to buy up anything that he likes. Because I was reading, because just it brings me onto the Tunnels and Trolls thing. You mentioned Tunnels and Trolls, and I saw that just recently Rebellion's acquired Tunnels and Trolls, and I was going to ask you about the role playing, because I'm a huge fan of role playing. I've never played Tunnels and Trolls, but in the 80s I played Dungeons and Dragons and basically any other role-playing game I could get my hands on, including the Judge Dredd role-playing game I remember way back in the late 80s. And now I still play Dungeons and Dragons, but I've kind of it's all just distilled now into Dungeons and Dragons, which I still play.
Yeah, well, I don't have much time to do role playing these days because I've got so much on. I've got a young family, and I've got a big family with the horses. I've got 17 horses that need to be looked after, and I'd look after myself. So, and I've got an even bigger family with the Rebellion people. There's a lot of people there, and it's not. When you run a business, my perspective on it is it isn't just the people that are working for you that are important, it's their families as well. And sometimes we employ the only breadwinner in a family setup, not always, but sometimes. And therefore what I do as the most senior manager, along with my brother Chris and the management team, we need to make decisions, ethical decisions, with the consequence for people that work with us in mind as well. So if it comes to a really, really risky project with a high reward but a high risk, probably wouldn't do that. We'd probably do something a bit safer that was less of a risk, reasonable reward. More importantly, sort of fits in with what we like doing and is going to be fun. So I've said in a few interviews before now, people say, why would you have bought Tunnels and Trolls? And the answer is because I could, and we'll do something really cool with it in due course when we get around to it. And that's often been the motivation for doing things. As an opportunity turned up, I have the opportunity to rescue 2000 AD and turn it around and make it continue that institution. And that's I think that's quite a nice legacy to do. And again, coming back to the Arthurian quests, doing these things because they're the right thing to do is actually very knightly.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I think looking, I could speak for myself, but I think Stephen probably agree. We're both massive fans of 2000 AD and the very similar sort of genre stuff to you. So I can totally get that why you take the decision to help rescue these properties when they come along, or to buy up a property that you see that you think, man, this is something I've loved for the last 30-40 years, and why wouldn't you want to help it?
Yeah, we're great believers in the importance of what some commentators have occasionally called low culture, which I think is a terrible way of looking at it. I think the reason is because it's the opposite of high culture, like opera or whatever, which again are equally good. But the idea that comics were not really written for nostalgia purposes. Nobody was trying to sort of build a legacy of making comics. They were commercially disposable kids' entertainment, and as such, there's a sort of honesty to comics.
Yeah.
Over and above some literary author writing their memoir, where they're kind of writing it with a full view that this is going to go to the sort of literary group, and this is going to make a statement about their life and how they're positioning it. If somebody's writing a Commando comic, or the Beano, or 2000 AD, or back in the day, Roy of the Rovers, or whatever it might be, they're just doing it. They make a bit of money and tell an entertaining story, and their legacy be damned,
Yeah. And you actually own Roy of the Rovers as well, I believe now.
Oh, yeah, Roy of the Rovers, yeah.
I used to love that as well. Yeah,
we own close to 80% of British comics publishing history.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, we the earliest. You'll be amazed. The earliest comic publication we have the rights to is Comic Cuts for Boys, which goes back to 1888.
Wow.
So we acquired all these libraries. They'd all been split up and reformed and everything, but we managed to sort of grab them and push them all together. So we've got thousands of girls' comics, and they were called girls' comics back in the day, and they're interesting because they involve, how to be a successful ballet dancer, how to rescue your pony that's been stolen, how to become a skateboarding wizard. There's all sorts of fascinating girls' comics subjects there. Boys' comics, obviously, quite a lot about combat and battle. And throughout history, you can see how those change as well. And there was a fascinating one. I happened to stumble across it in our archive. We've got a real archive, and we've got 2 archivists full-time work for us, because it's important cultural thing, I think, this stuff. There's a boys' own comic from the early 1940s, which is obviously the middle of the Second World War, and it's got how to organize an ambush with your scout group. And this is a real, this is a real military, this is advice for sort of 10 to 14-year-old boys about laying an ambush. And I was thinking, wow,
but you can imagine. You can imagine something like that now. There'll be some web pages made by Ukrainian people for Ukrainian teenagers saying, this is the kind of thing that you care about if you think you're going to be invaded or you are being invaded by someone. So.
It's absolutely fascinating. So it's a snapshot of history throughout it. And you go back to some of the early things and you can see social kind of attitudes and how much they've changed. And sometimes how much they've stayed the same. There's some really, really interesting characters that are must have been incredibly progressive for the 1940s and 1950s, let alone 1960s, and others that are just awful. You couldn't republish them outside of an academic analysis of social tropes at the time.
Yeah,
it's just too awful. But there's some really good stories as well. That's one of the things with the Treasure of British Comics, which is a sort of sub-brand of Rebellion's publishing arm. We're bringing these things back, like the Trigon Empire, like the Spider, who was the king of criminals back in the 1930s. Sexton Blake, who was much bigger than Sherlock Holmes and was a precursor for James Bond. Ian Fleming was a boyhood fan of Sexton Blake. And that's where James Bond comes from. And you can clearly see the influence this character had on James Bond. And basically, he wrote Sexton Blake under a different name.
Yeah. And amazing.
Yeah. And it kind of brings us on to the next question of movies influencing, or, previous characters influencing other ones. So Judge Dredd being influenced by Dirty Harry. And of course, you had the Mega City TV series in production, didn't you? I believe until COVID halted it. So I think Carl Urban was on board, and you maybe had other, like the Dark Judges.
We had lots of people penciled in to work on that, and that got stuck with COVID. And one of the things I'm quite keen on is making sure we maintain control of productions. As we all know, recently there have been some really expensive productions that have failed to deliver for the fans, and they're disappointing. They waste a lot of money, and we want to make sure we have meaningful control of these things. So that if somebody is making Mega City 1 with us, they're making it with us. There, we don't just give them the rights and let them do their own thing. So it's slow going negotiating the right deals, but my job is guardian of these characters. And that's how I genuinely see it. It's sort of, it's none shall pass, unless they're going to do the right thing. And so Hollywood's an interesting place. There's some wonderful people that live and work in it, but it's also quite cutthroat as well. And so negotiating with Hollywood types is it's an interesting adventure.
Do you have any?
I can imagine it must be interesting for someone who's going in from the perspective of, I'm going to be honest and chivalric and try to do everything above board, and then trying to negotiate with some people in Hollywood must be quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they just come at it from a different perspective. They're just deal makers. It's all about deals. Some industries are like that, and that's just Hollywood is about that. And it is about smoke and mirrors, literally and metaphorically. It's an industry about reputation and credits and positioning, and it gets complicated. When I say, but we want this kind of a deal because we want to protect John Wagner and Carlos Esquerra's legacy of creating Judge Dredd. We want to make sure their names are up front in the credits. They go, oh, we can't do that. It's like, well, you have to, as far as I'm concerned. Can't not do it. It's a credit. Oh, but that sets precedents. Like, I don't give a flying toss whether it sets precedents or not. That's what we want for you to do this. All right. Simple as that. And they get tied up in knots a little bit. We are getting there. We're making progress. It's very slow, but I'm okay with that. I know the fans are frustrated sometimes. It could be faster, but we would have given lots of stuff away. And the danger with that is that there's more chance there'll be a load of bad stuff made using characters that people love.
Is this TV series still in production then?
We've got several TV series in production, not just about Judge Dredd. Yes, it's in sorry, the word is in development. It's in development.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not in production yet. There's no filming started, but it's in development at a very advanced stage. There lots of things are in at very advanced stages, but we haven't quite got over that hump to actually get them into production yet. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. Yeah.
Can you tell us
any others?
Sorry, Matthew, I just really want to know if Carl Urban was going to be involved because he was so good in the Dredd movie.
Carl's very busy at the moment. I can't reveal anything, but he's a friend of mine. Well, he's an acquaintance of mine, a friend of mine. We've had long chats. Had long chats with lots of other. You'd be surprised how many Hollywood actors and actresses are actually huge fans of 2000 AD and fans of our work. You meet somebody who go, "Oh, I know your work," and they go, "Yeah, I know your work too." I was talking to somebody. I won't mention his name because he hasn't given permission, but a big star and really nice guy. We were having lunch, and he was saying, "Yeah, I watched your last YouTube video. It was really cool. I really enjoyed it." And it's like, that's a bit weird because I watched your last TV show recently too, and I really enjoyed that.
Nice.
That's nice. So, well, we'll watch this space then. We'll watch for the TV series.
Yeah, we announce stuff when we can, but it's very tempting to kind of announce stuff before you're ready to announce it. And I think as frustrating as that is for people, rest assured there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. It's a little bit like, when you see a swan gliding across the surface of the water and it looks all majestic and it's all sort of fluid and how beautiful. And beneath it, there are these bloody great big legs paddling like fury to propel it, looking so smooth and graceful. Well, we're basically what people see as the swan and what's actually happening at the legs. There's a ton of work with a lot of talented, creative people going on. We will get there. We'll get there soon. I mean, the great thing is we have our own film studios. So we have the facilities. We even have our own costumes. I don't know, you probably didn't know we have a costume department. We have a very, very large costume department on site at the film studios. And that they rent costumes to film and TV productions all the time. It's quite fun to go there when I need kit for my YouTube. Have you got this? Yeah. Do you want to borrow it? Yeah. Do you want a tabard? Do you want this? That? Yeah. Fine. So I go home with a bootload of fantastic clothes that look good on camera. So it's exciting but frustrating in equal measure.
Yeah.
That's good. I'm just happy to know that it's still coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with Stephen that the Dredd movie, although there were certain things about it that didn't quite hit the spot, but in terms of feel and sort of look and everything, Carl Urban was fantastic, and it sort of really did begin to capture what my thoughts of.
Yeah, that was Alex. That was Alex's vision of 2080, and I think it was done for a certain budget, and it was very, very successful. Although the release was delayed for quite a long time, which I think damaged it at the box office because it was delayed for well over 9 months from when it was supposed to come out, and I think that was just for internal reasons at the distributor or finding the right slot for the movie. Yeah. So very frustrating when things like that happen through no fault of anybody involved in the.
Yeah. So talking about upcoming films and things, what about games? So have you got any 2000 AD video games on the horizon? Dredd, Strontium Dog, or anything?
Again, sorry to be evasive, but nothing I can announce. But we've got a lot in development. We've got 4 projects that none of which have been announced. Again, I'm sorry, it's too soon as well. Because sometimes projects you think they're going to take 2 years and they can take 4. And again, the trouble is if you announce them, everybody thinks, "Oh, it must be nearly ready," and it's like, no, there's a lot of work goes into it. And we are in the fortunate position of we don't release a game unless we think it's ready. Now, obviously, we try to stick to timelines and budgets and stuff, so we don't want to unnecessarily delay things. But we do have the luxury. We have no external shareholders. There's no bankers or venture capitalists telling us you've got to release a project here. And we will release it when it's ready, within certain parameters. So yeah, that's exciting. And what's great about being me is I get to look at very early builds of the game, of all the games we're doing as they go along, and my job is to nudge them in direction I think they need to go, and that's a wonderful thing.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just one of the characters that Matthew mentioned, I think there is Slaine, who is for me anyway, a really underrated character, and it's historical fantasy, and something like the Horned God would certainly be enjoyed by many of our readers, but I don't think many people have even heard of Slaine. Do you have any plans to get him out there more? And
well,
maybe
Slaine's wonderful. Slaine created by Pat Mills and Angie Kincaid, and they're really great stories. They're sort of heavily based on, well, kind of pre-Roman,
like mythology, Celtic mythology, or
mythological stuff. So heavily based on real myths. I don't know if that's a word. See what I mean? Real old made up stories,
real, historical myths.
Yeah, historical myths, and but with a twist and the magic, and the warp spasm and the sky chariots, and Lord Weird Slough Feig, or however you say his name. I don't know. Some of the names in 2000 AD, you kind of how they sound in your head, and then you hear somebody else say it. I think pronounce it differently.
Yeah, I think that made a big impact in me writing all this historical fiction stuff, and I've got all these characters. People say, "How do you pronounce their name?" Because they're based on real Anglo-Saxon names. Or half of the time, I don't know.
I had no idea.
When they do the audiobook, the actor contacts me and says, "How do you pronounce?" I say, "I don't know." So he has to go off and ask someone else. Yeah.
Well, I was doing some research on the early medieval period, and all the egg kings, as I call them, all the kings that are Egbert and Egilbreth and Egbert, Egbod, and I think it just means prince or something anyway. So it's like king. Let's just drop the egg bit, all right? It'd be easier, because if everything starts with egg something, I get very confused very quickly. So
yeah,
and then I was looking at studying the Norman conquest a bit, as the sort of that massive change on these islands when the Normans invaded and took over, and how the names changed. So names like Harold and Henry and Patrick, these are all Norman names, and we literally, high society used to have sort of Aethelwulf and the Anglo-Saxon names, which were quite hard for us to even read, because you have to sort of spell them out in your head and sort of pronounce them and track of it. Yeah. And then the Normans come along, and some they got names like Patrick and John and Henry. And then you go, oh yeah, I'm very familiar with those. And that shows you the legacy of the Norman conquest in our language. And then I was having a conversation with a linguist about why English is such a complex and wonderful language for saying things like poetry. And it's because of the overlay of so many different languages. So to ask a question is Anglo-Saxon, to demand an answer is Norman French, demander. But they're both saying, they're both asking something, but one's really strong, and that's the Norman one, and one's kind of softer and gentler, and that's the Anglo-Saxon one. So they're literally the same word, but has different social context for us. And that's as a result of the Norman conquest. And I just find that's the sort of thing I talk about in the YouTube channel. It's like these human levels, there's this human interaction that are still with us. I studied, if you don't mind me keeping on going a little bit about this.
That's okay. Keep going.
I was looking at where the word murder comes from, and murder comes from it predates the Normans, but it's called the Murdrum fine, and it actually goes back to the Danish settlers were coming over here, and the local people were kind of killing them, and there's a dead body found, and if it was a Dane, there'd be a fine of the local area. You either had to produce the person that killed them for punishment, or everybody in the area would be fined, and it was an attempt at collective punishment for a society where a Danish settler was killed. That went away. That was under one of the earlier kings. Then the Normans came back, and the same sort of thing was happening to Normans. Norman settlers and Norman travelers were being waylaid in the woods and forests, like Robin Hood did, and murdered. And they reintroduced this murdrum fine. And the amazing thing is, you could not get away with a murder, but it wasn't. The murdrum fine was the equivalent of about £100,000 for the local area collectively. So everybody would have to pay their share. The churches were exempt from it. Churches and monasteries were exempt from paying the fine. but every local person had to chip in, had to either find the person who did it, or if you could prove the person was English, what's called you had to present proof of Englishry. If you presented the fact that they were English, then everybody go, well, it's fine, it's not murder. I mean, obviously it's an unlawful killing, and we'll have to work out what it is, but nobody's going to get fined for it. So you've got in the courts these things of people trying desperately to prove this dead body is English to not pay the fine, and you've got fraud of Englishry as well. So people were people were taking anything that could identify them as a Norman off them, like
right, yeah,
dressing them in the local cheaper clothes, and that was being presented by the local coroner as a fake. And people go, no, this guy is actually Norman. Everyone's going, no, we recognise him. He's Bert from our local village, definitely. And they go, no, it's Lord so and so's son. And people having huge arguments over this dead body, whether they're English or not, because everybody knew it mattered. It was a lot of thousands of pounds for each person, the equivalent, and it's stuff like that. What a brilliant scenario!
That could be a good story. Yeah.
Proving somebody's English to get away with the murder fine, Yeah,
I can imagine him shaving, maybe some Norman knight shaving off his beard and pretending it's like you say, Bert. And then some guy going, that's my dad. That's not a Norman.
Yeah, exactly. All that kind of stuff. So proof of Englishry. And it's all down in the courts. People are trying to avoid paying the fine. Yeah. I find this stuff really interesting. Going through the court records was really, really interesting. The amount of people that were suing their neighbor for their pig escaping into their garden and that kind of stuff. But it mattered to the people at the time. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone to court over it.
We've talked about lots of the games. I think we mentioned the Sniper Elite games. I'm actually a big fan as well. I play. Oh, they both of us play Sniper Elite. I played Sniper Elite 5 just last weekend with a mate of mine. We do the co-op things every time one comes out. He buys it for my birthday, I buy it for his birthday. Then we go through the missions. So we were up until like 2:00 in the morning on Friday night last weekend, and both regretted it afterwards. But I have to say, I did message him the next day, and I said, I feel like I'm hungover from playing so late, killing all those Germans in the game. So it's a bit politically incorrect here, but it's a Second World War game for anyone who doesn't know. And he replied, he says, I'm sure you mean fun over.
Very good.
Oh my God.
I like it.
Anyway, so
you should keep
it's
his
historical. Yeah, he's sticking with the day job, yeah. So but they're historical games. They're almost like interactive movies. And the question really is, do you play yourself?
Yes, I do. Yeah. I play when I can. Obviously, some of the games are so big now, and they can take up, tens or hundreds of hours of play, especially the co-op, especially with the invasion mode, which I'm really proud of us doing. The idea that randoms can invade your single player game, and and suddenly it changes it entirely. You can switch that on and off for people that aren't interested in randoms coming in and trying to kill you, but it does change it just changes the risk quite a lot.
At the moment we've switched that off. It's the first time we played Sniper Elite 5, so we switched that off. But who knows? Once we've gone through all the missions, maybe we'll do another run through and switch it on.
Exactly. There are people that absolutely love invading other people's games, and I think that's fine as long as you, as I say, as long as you can switch it off if you don't enjoy it. That's the key thing. Yeah. So the historical stuff is interesting because researching that, we did a lot of work with the Royal Armouries, which of course has a lot of medieval things in it, but it also has early modern stuff as well, and working with some of their firearms experts and getting advice on what weapons might be available at the time and what they could do. And then of course there's how you modify the historical side of it to make it into a good game. We've spoken to real snipers, and they say what we've managed to do is a distillation of actual real sniping, but real sniping involves being very uncomfortable for very long periods of time and pooing in plastic bags and taking it home with you. It's sort of not that glamorous.
Then to shoot one person and then to disappear.
Not a lot of fun, I'd imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Very slowly disappear, or in fact go somewhere, observe for 24 hours, realize they haven't got a shot, and then go away again, with nothing actually happening at all. So, but what we tried to do is sort of distill it down to the experience that would help people understand. And the other thing, you probably don't, I don't know whether people notice this, but the Sniper Elite games are about doing the mission, not about killing everybody in the world. I mean, you can kill everybody, but you don't have to. You can go around them. You can work out how to circumvent the threat. There are some guards you have to kill, if you want an easier life, but we usually have alternate paths in, so you can play the game and not kill that many people.
We've definitely noticed that. Doing the co-op stuff, we definitely noticed that you can go the wrong way and sort of kick off a massive
the alarm goes off.
Swarm of enemies, or you can go somewhere else. And we were saying that the weekend, actually, me and this mate of mine, about how it seemed like the AI was better in the NPCs, the soldiers, that you're up against now than the past.
That's always a moving target, AI behavior in games, because you don't really want to do AI. You kind of want I come back to films, you want them to be a whole bunch of stunt performers that are entertaining, making you feel that you're threatened, but they're not really trying to kill you. They're trying to make sure they entertain you.
I know what you mean. If they were too clever, they'd just kill you all the time, and that would be it,
or they just hide all the time like people do. It's like there's a sniper around, but I'm going to take cover and I'm going to stay here until somebody else deals with it. And that's what happens in real war, quite frankly. You go over there. No, I'm just going to stay behind this very safe wall and just keep quiet. No, everybody goes away. And so there's a balance there. So AI is one of those tweaky things, and it's hard. It's a hard thing to get right. As anybody that makes games or plays them, people play the Sniper Elite games in different ways as well. One of the fun things is making sure our QA team don't say the game's too easy on easy level, because obviously they've been playing the game for thousands of hours and they're professionals. They think a level is easy. That's good, because they're really good players. And what you don't want is the QA saying, I think easy difficulty is not challenging for me. It's like, no, of course it's not. You've played 4,000 hours of this game. You should find easy ridiculously easy. But as I've got older, I've realized some games I just want to enjoy playing them. I don't necessarily want to be totally challenged. I kind of want a little bit of challenge and a little bit of, hey, I got through that bit. But I don't want to be stuck there thinking, you know what, my life's too short. I can't be asked. I'm going to not play this game anymore. That's a real
absolutely. It's a really, like you say, it's a really fine balance to strike, because I remember there was one bit in the mission that we were struggling to find whatever it was we needed to bomb or something, and you start getting frustrated. After like 10 minutes of wandering around this map, we killed all the bad guys in that area, and we're like, what the hell are we supposed to be doing now? And when you get on those moments, obviously there can become a point where you say, well, that's it, I'm pissed off now, I'm not going to play this anymore. But it's
well, the two games I was playing recently, I really liked the art style of Ori and the Blind Forest and a Hollow Knight, and they're platformers. For anybody who doesn't know, these are these are modern versions of your traditional Super Mario platformer. They are hard as nails, though.
Too hard for me.
That really disappoints me, because I really wanted to love the game, and I love both of them. I love the art style, I love the atmosphere. I'm just not good enough to play the game.
I'm the same.
I think you're right. It comes with a certain age and not being able to input enough time into it. Sitting for hours.
It's too hard to be fun.
And I just want to play the game for fun, a distraction, half an hour here. I've got a bit of time before dinner, and I play a game, or waiting for a meeting or something, quickly jump on a game and enjoy it. What I don't want to do is think, oh, for fuck's sake, I've tried to do that jump now 26 times. I know what I've got to do, but I can't do it because I'm not getting the timing exactly to the nearest microsecond perfect. And I think, without being rude to those people, I think that's a failure in management and quality assurance, because those games can be as hard as nails on hard mode. Fine with that. But give me a tourist mode. Give me an easy mode. I don't mind playing a game on easy, because I'm happy to play a game on easy mode. Thank you, because I want to play it on easy mode. If I play it through and enjoy it, I might then challenge myself, pop it up to medium or hard, and realize I'm shit at the game and put it back down again. But just don't make a game for the hardest of hardcore, because it's such a waste of effort.
I think it kind of harks back. It's like the old days of the Commodore 64. You maybe only had one game to play for a month because that's all your pocket money you could afford. So you would have
Yes.
to keep playing it over and over again, and it kind of eventually you would end up knowing what to do and you would like it. But nowadays we've got too much. We've got, we don't have time to just sit and play one game. We want to just enjoy it quickly and then move on to the next one. So
Yeah.
you
So
want it easy.
I think that's really important when you're designing a game, and we do it, and I tell my team all the time, I want a mode that's almost ridiculously easy.
Yeah, God
because
mode almost, yeah.
I want people to really enjoy, whiz through the game, 6 hours, have spent a weekend or a long weekend playing it. They've really enjoyed it. Not been much of a challenge, a few little challenges, but basically they've enjoyed it. That's really good value for money for those people.
Yeah. I think your term you use, tourist mode, I think that's a great one, because games look so good now. Most games, they all look good. Even games that frankly are not very good, not very enjoyable. I don't find them enjoyable. They still look amazing. All games now look great.
Yeah.
So a tourist mode, you can just wander around and see what's there. That's almost half the battle, isn't it? Really.
That's what I tell. That's what I tell the teams, and often it gets forgotten or left behind and stuff. And there's sometimes issues about, well, how do we unlock this door and that kind of. It's like, well, just make it really difficult for the player to die and give them lots of ammo. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be bragging. Are people going to brag? I don't care. If they want to brag, they paid for this game. Why can't they play it any way they like?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, moving on from games in the Second World War, I think you've got a question now, Stephen, about horses.
Yeah, your YouTube video, it starts off with, all the YouTube videos start off with you riding a horse, and you obviously have 17, you said. So how do you think authors portray riding in their books? Do you get annoyed when people clearly have no idea? Like, I mean, I might have ridden a horse when I was a child, but not as an adult, but I have to still include it in books and try and kind of write about it realistically in some way. How do you feel about that when you read a book? And
if the book's really good and well written and the story's going, I don't have a problem with people getting things wrong. And I'm boasting now. I am a bloody expert at horse riding. So of course I'm going to see things in riding that, I see it in movies all the time. I see good riders in movies, and I'm going, you've lost control of that horse in the background there. You should be really careful. And that horse is about to fall over, and then you realize they edited it because the horse did fall over. And I can see things that are happening. So no, I never get annoyed. It's a bit like watching historical drama. The only thing I would get annoyed about would be, let's take Game of Thrones, for example. Game of Thrones, fantasy. It's got dragons in it. It's made in this fictional place. Armor, though, is meant to protect you. If armor doesn't protect you from some of the threats you're wearing on that you're going to encounter on the battlefield, there's no point wearing it. You might as well just not bother. And this is what happens in history. The weapons get so good that basically armor doesn't make any difference. So then you start to have a line of men and march towards the other side and hopefully shoot them before they shoot you. And once people realize that wearing red on the battlefield is a bad idea, people start to wear khaki and hide. And now you've got people in camouflage, and it's all about not being seen because the weapons are so good. Armor is supposed to be protective. And even in a fantasy setting where you've got magic and you've got monsters, the armor still serves its physical purpose, which is to protect you. Now, there is armor. Armor obviously shows off wealth and status, and it can be a boasting thing. It can be a social positioning thing as well. Sure, it can be decorative too, but primarily armor was built to protect usually very wealthy men from as many battlefield threats as possible. You can bet your bottom dollar that they wanted to walk away from that battlefield having stories to tell, but being alive, and that's what they were spending their vast amounts of money on, the armor. So that, to me, so reading a good book, no, it's just I wouldn't expect details of how to saddle a horse, or how to put a bridle on, how you slip the bit between the teeth, how you get a horse to open its mouth, what to do if a horse is really sweaty after a long journey. I do like it when horses are treated as living things, though, that have their own. It's just a mention, that our character gets to a tavern and hands the horse to the stable boy who rubs it down and gives it water and hay. That's all I need, that to know that the horse is taken care of. I don't like it when horses disappear and then reappear.
like
Like,
cars that have been parked. Yeah.
exactly. Like a little line saying, even if he had it was an ambush, he had to go and fight on foot, so he jumped off the horse, and then 10 minutes later he's trying to find the horse, and the horse is over there eating some grass, because that's what horses do. They might sort of go a little bit distance, then it'll find some grass and start eating it, and that's where you'll find it. If in doubt, look for the nearest patch of nice juicy grass if you've got a lost horse, because that's where it'll be, almost certainly. So no, I love books. I love reading. I read on the Kindle these days mostly because it's just more convenient form factor for me, especially when I'm traveling or sitting in the dark trying to read. And I do read a ton of genre. If anybody had any good suggestions of new books to read, I always think that's worthwhile discussing.
Yeah, so some books by Stephen Mackay and Matthew Harvey, particularly brilliant. So I think should be looking for some
Which
of
ones
those.
would you recommend I read then of your work?
For mine, I would say probably The Druid, just because it's the current series and I like them the best. So.
Good.
And I've only got one standalone, but I think if you just want to pick one book up and see what you think of my writing, then Wolf of Wessex. I would say pick that up. That's set in the 9th century.
I'll just make a note of both of those.
You can see what you think of that.
Well, we can send
if you like
them,
that,
I'm
then
sure.
Yeah, we could probably
Yeah,
get
if
you
you've got
a copy
Kindle Unlimited, actually, they're both on there.
Yeah,
yeah,
cool.
they
I've
are.
got Kindle Unlimited. I've made a note. I'll look for them. I'm happy to bung you some money. I'll buy them. I don't mind that. I know.
Well,
I know.
Kindle Unlimited, we get paid anyway.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
Okay, good.
Yeah, you do get some money with Kindle Unlimited, thank goodness. Yeah,
And I think my Druid can actually whistle on his horse and it runs to him.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Well, I
I've
did.
put that.
I got asked by one of my watchers, can you read a book while riding? And I just thought that's a really good point. I've never tried. So I got this is one of the videos is right. I'm going to try this because it's one of the themes from my YouTube video is this possible? How far can you go on a horse? What can you do? What happens when is this real or not? What do the historical records say? And does that seem plausible? And can I do it? And the simple answer is you can when you're walking on a horse. You can if the print is big enough when you're cantering, because it's a sort of a steadier movement.
Yeah.
If your horse is trotting, forget it. You can't.
No chance.
So if you imagine you had a band of travelers, adventurers, or whatever, and the mage is sort of in the middle of it, the horses tend to follow horses. So the person at the front probably needs to be keeping an eye out and doing it. But the people behind could be studying spells and reading, practicing on their journey as they go. They wouldn't be paying any attention to the surroundings, but if you've got other people doing it and the horses are just following on, you don't need to be that actively involved in the riding process if you're traveling long distances, especially over sort of roads that are there that horses have typically follow each other anyway. So I thought that was kind of an interesting one, and then I suddenly realized that that could quite a nice little moment, your adventuring heroes, your Dungeons and Dragons heroes. There's the ranger's gone on ahead, and then the fighters maybe in the lead, with his horse, and then behind there's a mage, and of course there's probably a bard playing some light music, and the mage could easily be studying spells as they travel, and I just thought it was a nice playing music, somebody reading a book, trundling along the landscape. That was a nice image.
Yeah, sounds. Yeah, I can imagine that.
Very
I think
pleasant.
I read quite a lot of westerns, and in that you get often the people fall asleep on their horses and stuff. They're sort of like be sleeping on a long journey, like you'd say the horse is following the guy in front, and they fall asleep and wake up 2 hours later. They're I suppose snoozing.
You can definitely. I've done it. You can definitely doze on a horse. It depends on the saddle as well. I think Western saddles are easier to stay in than sort of modern English saddles. And for those that don't know, saddles are designed for all sorts of different things, and how they're designed is the job. So if you're roping cattle or traveling long distances, you want a comfy saddle, you need a horn on the front for tying ropes to and that kind of stuff. Medieval saddles vary, and Roman saddles don't have stirrups, and medieval saddles, the war saddles, have a big front plate which serves the purpose of keeping you in place, but also stops lances hitting you in an area you really don't want to lance between your legs. So it's physical armor, and some of them had steel over them as well, and they have big sort of ears around the back that hold you in place. So they're actually quite hard to fall off. those kind of saddles. Whereas there are saddles where, quite frankly, if you fell asleep, you'd probably fall off. It depends. Depends what you're doing.
You were asking for book recommendations, so we're sort of coming to the end of our time with you. But so we've got a couple. We're going to end on something about books in a second. But I just thought of another recommendation for you. Actually, great writer called Ian Ross had a book out just a couple of months ago called Battle Song, and it sets just the build up to the Battle of Lewes. So it's high medieval period, and there's a whole section at the beginning when the young squire goes to the joust. And he learns jousting, and they do the melee and everything around Europe, and they travel around Europe, and it's really, really well written, really exciting, really good.
I'll have a look at that, because I've done mounted melee, and that was interesting. If you don't know, jousting is relatively unchallenging for your riding skills, whereas mounted melee is much more challenging for riding skills. So they're different qualities of soldier would be needed for each of those.
I think you'll get a kick out of it. It's all about this young squire. He wants to become a knight, and who he joins forces with a knight. And he travels, and it's really, really good. And if you want to listen to Ian talking about it, you can listen to him on the podcast as well, because there is an episode.
Yeah, we interviewed
him when he came on. He was great.
Cool.
So we always end with a couple of questions at the end of every interview, which is, what have you been reading and watching recently? The first couple of questions we ask. So.
Cool. Well, I have been watching a lot of YouTube channels of a slightly sort of more YouTube channels that haven't got so many subscribers, that are interesting. So I've been doing quite a lot of work because of Tunnels and Trolls. I've been doing quite a lot of work in live action role playing and online kind of role playing sessions and that kind of stuff. So there's a bunch of those I've been searching, and of course with YouTube, once you start watching one, you get a whole bunch of other ones. And would you believe it, but I'm reading Lord of the Rings again.
I would believe it.
Yeah, I used to read it every year, so I can believe it.
Yeah, I'm reading it again because I realized that my images from Lord of the Rings were more shaped by the movies, which are brilliant, by the way. I'm criticizing them. But my recent memories of Lord of the Rings were more shaped by the movies than the book, and I just thought I need to refresh my memory of the book, and the book is very different. I mean, it's incredibly different.
Detailed.
Merry and Pippin. If people, they've just got to Fangorn and they've met Treebeard, but Treebeard is in the Entmoot, and they're talking about going to war with Isengard. So in the book, they know that Isengard is bad, and they just haven't got themselves worked up. They don't have to be. He doesn't have to be tricked into seeing the destruction. But in the book, and they're hanging out with Quickbeam, who is a hasty Ent.
Yes, it's the younger one. Yeah. He's only a few hundred years old or whatever.
Exactly. So they're having a chat with him, and they're drinking Ent draft as well, of course, because in the book,
growing, aren't they? Yeah.
Merry and Pippin grow. They're like hugely tall. When they go back to the Shire at the end of it, they're hugely tall, and they're armed to the teeth. One's a Knight of Gondor, one's a Knight of Rohan, aren't they? With all the kit, and all the weapons, and all the experience. They go back as really tall military veterans, which I think is wonderful. Obviously, it's missed out the whole scouring of the Shire. Spoiler: the whole scouring of the Shire is missed out in the movies because it's quite a different tone.
It is. It's a strange shift at the end that I can understand why it got left out.
But I still, Merry and Pippin, some of my favorite characters, because in the films they're made a bit like a comedy act, which is fine, well performed, really good. They work very well. But in the book, they're not. They're naive, but they're not stupid. And they become mighty warriors. I mean, Sam and Frodo don't become mighty warriors. They survive and they become survivors. But Merry and Pippin become the hardest motherfuckers in the Shire. And I don't think that's a really interesting character arc. They start out as sort of naive kids, really, on an adventure, and then they end up coming all the way back, armed in teeth, hard as nails, really tall. And it's just like, wow, that's brilliant.
Don't they deal with Saruman in the end, in the scouring of the Shire?
Yeah, they do. That's right. Yeah,
they sort him out, don't they?
Yeah, they do, because he escapes, doesn't he, from Isengard, and doesn't get killed, and he goes back to there with them. Right. It's Sharky. It's like one of the characters.
There's a man. That's right.
I think it might be Sharky, who they encounter at the beginning as well. In Bree, I think it's in Bree because the Breelanders take over. So yeah, it's fascinating. So much. I love movies, I love TV shows, but I love books. I've read the Witcher series recently as well, the books, and they're a bit chaotic because I wasn't sure which order to read them in because it's not that obvious when you're trying to read them what the order is. But I love them. I love them too. Yeah, I'm not sure what I'll read after Lord of the Rings. I've still got probably a couple of weeks worth of evening readings to do on that one.
Nice one. Well, we're on to the final question then. We always ask people, so what have you been listening to, like music? Do you listen to music when you're writing, like your new book? And have you heard the Anthrax song, I Am the Law?
Of course I've heard the Anthrax song. Yeah, weirdly, we have an awful lot of heavy metal bands that are big fans of 2000 AD.
Yeah, Lemmy was one as well.
And lots of them, Metallica the other day got in contact, and they're great guys as well. I'm not particularly into my metal because it's a bit foreground music for me when I'm writing. So I've discovered kind of ambient music on YouTube, which I do quite a lot of craft work as well. So one of the ways I decompress, I ride horses and stuff. I ride around the woods here as well as training. But also I've just started to learn leather work. So I decided I needed to make a leather bottle, medieval leather travel bottle, because I might do one of my videos as a sort of medieval themed travel piece.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I need a water bottle and I better learn to make one. And so I've just got into that. So I listen to sort of ambient chanting music or sort of rainy kind of ringsy music or stuff like that. So discovering a whole sort of area of background music that is sort of soothing and sort of doesn't distract you too much.
I think we tend to get the same answer every time we ask that question, but not always the same like exact music, but it's always like a background kind of noise that people like.
Yes,
almost white noise.
I do love foreground music. I've never really been that into music as a sort of foreground activity. I've never really sat and listened to an album, for example. But I've got lots of friends who love it, so more power to them. I find my mind wanders, and it wanders into adventures or ideas or plans or notions, and I have to then write it down.
I always found it great especially with old vinyl. Now vinyl's making a resurgence, of course, but the old big sleeve notes, and you'd have all the lyrics and everything. You could sit down with a new album and actually read all the lyrics as you're going through and do that. I would do that when a new Marillion album or a Queen album or something came out in the 80s. I remember doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But, of course, that's gone away, hasn't it? With people just downloading the music, they miss out that complexity.
It's a shame. The younger ones have missed out completely in that.
Yeah.
There you go. That's like three old men bemoaning the fact that youngsters aren't enjoying.
It was better back in the old days.
Yeah, I just think sometimes I don't mind what young people do because they've always done things differently, and they should be doing things differently.
Absolutely.
I hate the idea of people doing things. I want them to forge their own futures, but I also think the past has lessons for us as well, and we kind of need to balance future and past and principles. And so I would always say, everybody should try to listen to all sorts of music.
I think that's a really interesting and good place to end, really, isn't it? Whereas that the people should always be looking backwards as well as forwards for what's,
have an open
how
mind.
to live. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. That's been brilliant. Yeah,
amazing.
My pleasure. It's been really fun talking to you, and good luck with it. Let me know when it comes out, and I'll obviously do all the socials.
Thank you so much. We will do. Well, that's it for today's episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. We had a great time. If you have enjoyed it, please take a moment to leave a review on whatever platform you're listening on, and don't forget to subscribe.
Let us know if you have any questions or things you would like us to cover in future episodes. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/Rock Paper Swords podcast, and on Twitter @rock_swords. You can find out more about our books on MatthewHarvey.com and StephenAMackay.com.
The theme music is written and performed and copyrighted by us. Until next time, a Rock Paper Swords, it's goodbye from me, Matthew Harvey.
And it's goodbye from me, Stephen A. Mackay.
And remember, whatever action and adventure you have going on in your life, be kind,
stay safe,
and happy reading. Ooh. underscore swords.